So it's 1990. I'm pursuing a PhD in anthropology at Université de Montreal under the direction of Gilles Bibot, and I resolved to go to Papua New Guinea. And the funding that I receive to do so comes from the Olfactory Research Fund. The Olfactory Research Fund, part of the Fragrance Foundation, sort of skims money from IFF, Estee Lauder, and other perfume and flavoring companies. Indeed, they equipped me with a series of plastic cards impregnated with odors, which I took with me to Papua New Guinea. So you'll see in this first slide 2, 3 children actually smelling these cards, and they are very brightly colored. So, for example, one is white, and actually it has a coconut smell. Another is yellow, and it has a lemon smell. There were green and red and purple and other note cards also. So it was very interesting, people's responses to these cards. The pine scent reminded them of a local conifer, and they sent the children scurrying into the woods to come back with a bit of the bark to, bring out how close the smell was of this artificial fragrance and the wood. And then, as far as the smell of coconut was concerned, however, they said cookies. So they didn't confuse this artificial scent with the coconuts which were all around us. Rather, it was the artificially flavored coconut cookies from the Chinese trade store that they saw as similar. The lemon, again, nothing to do with the local citrus fruits, but rather detergent. Because again, from the Chinese trade store, you had detergent available, and it was lemon scented, which has, of course, become a universal association between lemon scent and cleanliness. The brown card, which was for cinnamon, was thought to be very interesting, and they wanted to know where they could get more of that. The cinnamon made people just sort of sneeze because it was so very powerful, and they thought it had magic virtue. Interesting as well was the response to the red card, which was rose. I asked people which was their favorite smell, and initially, rose came up again and again, and I thought a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, that perhaps truly, the rose is a universal preference. But then it occurred to me that maybe there might be some interference stemming from the color of the sample. And indeed, red is a very important color with all kinds of symbolic associations. And so I started handing around the samples concealed in envelopes instead of being visible. And alas, this preference for the rose disappeared. Okay, so the conclusion is obviously there are no universal preferences when it comes to smell. Even rose, isn't necessarily the prime and most beautiful scent. So that was how it started. But again, my interest following McLuhan was not just in smell, it was in all the senses and their interrelationship. And so I was concerned with studying the sensory order, first of the societies of the Masim region, where you find the Kula Ring. And I was actually at the town of Budoya on Ferguson Island, which is right next to Dobu, and is sort of across from Normandy. And Sort of the men talked with me about the kula all the time. It was an absolute obsession with them. And what was interesting was actually what I came to see about the shells. So just as an example, here is a kula shell. It's not an especially distinguished one. It's quite small. But notice how there's both the shell, the arm shell, and then also the attachments. And the attachments consist of beads and other shells. And notice the sound, the tinkling sound that they make. This is an example, again, not a very impressive example, of one of the necklaces. And it, too, has a very distinctive feel and a very distinctive color. As you know from Malinowski, these two kinds of valuables move against each other around the ring. And so, what interested me as I explored this was the sensory qualities of the shell. And so, actually, there's an example that I have by way of a slide. And this is a magnificent specimen, this third slide of a kula shell, an armband. And you can see how, glorious the attachments are, how mammoth the attachments are, how mammoth the arm shell is itself. And so there are a number of things that are important about these shells. One is you will see how smooth they are. And that comes from being polished repeatedly, both by the sea and then by human hands. You'll see how luminous they are. Okay, they truly shine. And that's partly also from being rubbed with coconut oil. And the coconut oil is fragrant as well as being oily. So these shells have a fragrance as well. So they are smooth, they are luminous, they are fragrant, and they have this sound when you move them, this tinkling sound. And even though the attachments don't contribute to the value of the shell, they are an integral component of it. A shell would be naked without them. And finally, big shells, like the one that you see in the screen, have names, okay? And indeed become storied as they move ever so slowly from one partner to another around the ring. This shell, I'm afraid, has no name. It's just not significant enough, but at least I could actually acquire it as a result, and I paid good money for it. But the ones that do move are very, very key. And what I came to realize was that actually these shells hold up a mirror to their possessor. Now, the possessor only ever has a shell or a necklace temporarily. When their kula partner comes, they must relinquish it to one or the other, depending on the direction of the travel. In effect, one of the things about the whole kula ceremony as well is that the men will, before visiting their host in that person's village, they will scrape their skin clean. They will oil it so they glow. They radiate luminosity. And the paints that they use to paint their skin are fragrant, so they radiate a beautiful aroma. And they engage in kula talk in an effort to sort of persuade their partner to give them the best shell, the most renowned shell in the partner's possession. And then, if they are fortunate, they will make off back to the canoe with the shell. And as they make their way to the beach, this is what you hear. And it's said that there's a monitor lizard on Dobu that hears this sound and then amplifies it, so that back home, if you're in the Trobriands, back on Dobu or back on Ferguson, you can actually hear the monitor lizard bellowing. And then this refrain is taken up by the women who compose all these songs about the exploits of their men, both making use of the names of the kula shells and the names of the men. So the men get to be, spoken about, sung about in song. And this is what everybody is striving for, because the kula is not actually about the love of give and take for its own sake, which is what Malinowski, suggested to us. Actually, as Nancy Munn revealed from her work on Gawa, all of the point of the kula is to acquire butu. And butu means both fame and noise. And indeed, men will say, there are islands where people have never seen my face, but they know my name. Okay? Because their name has circulated together with the shell that passed through their possession. And so it may be out of sight, but not out of sound. And it was that idea of having a name full of noise, almost like thunder, that motivated the men to calculate about who to give one shell to as opposed to which a necklace and so forth. And in this way, try to increase their fame. So just what you'd expect of an oral society, this obsession with sound might be thought to be related to the fact that speech is the dominant medium of communication. Confirmation of McLuhan, you might think. But then I went to the Middle Sepik River. Then I went to Ambunti and Tongwenjam, both of which are in Kwoma territory. And the Kwoma are a people of the Washcook Hills. And Kwoma society differs very markedly from Masim society. In Kwoma society, first of all, the men are painters and sculptors, and the visual culture of the Middle Sepik region, as you no doubt know, is unbelievably rich. So the men spend much of their time painting these bark boards with representations of the spirits, and those are hung in the men's house and look down from the rafters. The men also make effigies, sculptures of various culture heroes, and they are responsible both for carving them and for also, propitiating them in the context of ceremonies like the yam ceremony each year. And during the yam ceremony, the men who are inside the men's house, behind a screen, make a horrendous noise with bull roars and so forth. And the women and uninitiated men who are outside on the other side of the screen hear this and are frightened, because this is the voice of the spirits. And, those spirits are pretty fearsome. And this is an example of a Yena head, and I think it's very significant for a number of things. One is that you'll notice, I think it actually gives us insight into the sensory order of Kwoma society. First of all, the ears, which are at the top, are very small, but you have the huge bulging eyes, an elongated nose, and this huge lolling tongue. Now, what is the tongue about? Is this a sign of gluttony? Actually, not at all. What it sort of points to is the importance of the voice, and indeed of shouting, because the big man amongst the Kwoma doesn't like to listen, but will shout, and indeed has a loud voice. And so, the loudness of the spirits, when they are, sort of present in the village, and the men are making these sounds within the men's house, and the visuality, hence the large eyes of all of the visual representations of the spirit, and the way the men control relations with the spirits through their control of the auditory means of communication, that is the bull roars and the flutes and so forth, that puts them in a position of power within the society. Women are excluded. Women believe their ears, whereas the men know from having seen inside the men's house, the truth, that the spirits are what men do. So what is the woman's sensorium? Well, women are constantly engaged in weaving net bags. And this is just a very small example of a net bag. I have many in my collection, and they are truly beautiful in terms of their weave and in terms of their texture. And basically, the women make these, give them to their male relatives and lovers and so forth. They carry children in them. So actually the word is bilum, which means womb. So these net bags are a second womb in a way. And the women, basically, who amongst the Quoma are forced to marry out of the village, weave the society together, literally by weaving these bags, and also through matrimonial alliance. The men, they're very agonistic, and indeed there are constant suspicions of sorcery. And one of the things is that a woman's husband is often seen as the most likely sorcerer. So there's real animosity in affinal relations. And so the women are trying to hold together a society, which is fractious because of the male preoccupation with the visual and visual divisions, keeping the woman out of knowledge of the sacra. A woman must not see the sacra. So, interestingly, there are different sensory specializations. The men are the masters of the visual universe and the acoustic universe. The women are mistresses of the tactile universe. Actually, there's a myth about how originally the bamboo flutes, it was the women who found them, and they went in a tree house and they played with them constantly, and they ordered the men to bring them food, and the men resented this, and they resented the bad treatment, and so they teamed up with a borer beetle which ate through the tree toppled, the men appropriated the flutes, and that's why men occupy a superior position in the society today as the ones who intercede with the spirits, and women don't have any role to play in that ritual. What I admire about this story is that it doesn't attribute male-female difference to any biological fact, testosterone or what have you. What it does is it points to how a male act of treachery and appropriation of the means of communication with the spirits resulted in the division of society along gender lines that you find today. So these are some of the findings, and there are many more that I report on in my thesis and in the book that came out of the thesis called Sensual Relations, which involved a comparative study of the sensory orders of two Melanesian societies. And my conclusion was that there are as many differences to the orchestration of the senses within the category of so-called oral societies as there are between oral societies and literate societies. So McLuhan's Great Divide theory, we have to abandon, okay? That print is not the great determinant of difference. Each society must actually be approached on its own sensory terms.